Hello and welcome back to another video. As you can see in this video, I'm making another laptop video or a screen share, but I wanted to talk about something that's always been near and dear to my heart, and that is Jehovah's Witnesses and their publisher count and the growth, because I've always been a numbers guy. So in this video, I'm going to talk about two different things that prove that Jehovah's Witnesses are lying. The first point is that the reason why we know that they're God's people is because the growth every year, growth, growth, growth. They constantly talked about that. And the second lie that Jehovah's Witnesses constantly say is the reason why Jehovah did not bring Armageddon in 1914, 1945, or 1975, or 2000 is because he wants more people to be saved. And now there's millions of more witnesses, so he wants everyone to be saved. But that's also a lie because in the 45 years that I've been alive, the world's population has doubled. So actually, God's going to have to kill a lot more people. But we'll get into that later. First off, let's do a quick history of Jehovah's Witnesses and numbers and why they are so fascinated with their publisher count. It is like Twitter followers or Facebook friends or Instagram likes. They've been guilty of this way before social media ever came into existence. So first off, what did Russell do? Well, Russell really wasn't that stickler when it came to numbers. He did in his Zion's Watchtower record how many Bible studies, how many Bibles they placed or brochures or pamphlets or magazines, but it wasn't a constant feature of the early Zion Watchtower. Monthly reports, yearly reports. They occasionally cherry pick some numbers and put it in their magazines, but he wasn't that big of a numbers guy. But when Rutherford had his coup and took over his power as president, he loved numbers, and immediately we see a dynamic shift in recording how many publishers there are, how much magazines are placed, how many hours on. So it really started, in the 1920s. For about 50 years, now I was not alive to see this, but I heard multiple older witnesses tell me these stories. My parents told me, up until about the 1970s, from the 1920s to the 1970s, every congregation had an easel by the lobby or the front door, and it showed how many active publishers, how many pioneers, how many Bible studies they had, how many magazines they placed, and back calls, and that chart was updated every month. So if you were visiting from another congregation, you could immediately see how good they were working their territory and how effective they were. That was foremost and center in every Kingdom Hall. Now, again, I was too young for that. I don't remember seeing that, but countless people told me they did that. Also, we started with I think in the 1930s, late 30s, early 40s is when the yearbook came out. So then the numbers of witnesses would be printed every year, but it wasn't just the yearbook also. We had the January 15th Watchtower. Remember, the center of the magazine would have like a 4 or an 8 page spread of every congregation, every country, every land and territory, and how many witnesses there were. And lastly, there was the Kingdom Ministry. The Kingdom Ministry was printed each month in each territory. It was a localized, 4 pager or 8 pager little pamphlet for that territory, that land, or that branch. It would have the highlights of how many witnesses, Bible studies, pioneers, yada, yada, yada. Now, when I was a kid, the U.S. branch territory only consisted of the 48 states. And the earliest memories I have, it was about 690 to 700,000 publishers in the mid 80s. But that was just the 48 states: Alaska, Hawaii, Puerto Rico, Guam, American Samoa, U.S. Virgin Islands, Turks and Caicos. They all had their own independent branches. So they all had their own reports. So they were not included in that number. Over the years, Watchtower slowly closed those branches in Alaska. Now those 3,000 publishers were added to the 48 states. The Puerto Rican branch was closed down. That also, there's 30,000 publishers added into that number. The Hawaii branch was closed down. Again, another 30,000 publishers added. So you did have slow growth in the United States. If you look at the Kingdom Ministry, it kept going up and up and up. But some of those numbers were artificial because they were counting Guam and U.S. Virgin Islands. So again, it wasn't huge numbers, but it was added more. So what happened when Watchtower slowly stopped growing? Well, they kind of backed off their numbers a little bit. First thing I really noticed right before I woke up was the Kingdom Ministry. When they switched to the Christian Life and Ministry meeting, the numbers were gone. They didn't have the monthly reports. After I left, they stopped printing the yearbook. But before I left, they stopped having the yearly results in the January 15th magazine. So this has been going on slowly for about 10 years, kind of backing off of how many witnesses there are or how forefront it is. But in the last few years, they still occasionally pick highlights that show they're growing in certain areas, memorial attendance or how many people were baptized. They will show those things. And they still have the grand totals, but it's not as detailed as each country because you can see declines in so many much more. Excuse me. So let's look into it. Let's get into it. I've been rambling off and on long enough. Let's look at the chart that I made here. Now, again, all this data is right from Watchtower sources, Revelation book, yearbooks. I kind of rounded up these publisher numbers. I also rounded up the world's population over here in this little chart that I made. We're going to start with 1920. Now, 1920, they had 3,800 publishers. This is after, Rutherford's been out of jail for sedition, for trying to overthrow the United States government. Sounds kind of familiar. He was that kind of person. But again, there was probably more Bible students than this because people don't talk about, after Rutherford gained power from Russell, a lot of people weren't happy and a lot of Bible students fled and never came back. Some estimates a third to half of all Bible students never became Jehovah's Witnesses. And, other people made videos about that. We're not going to go into that. So this is our baseline, 1920. That's 100 years ago, 3,800 witnesses. That means there was one Bible student or JW to about 500,000 people. And you can see there's like no percentage of the population. Now we're going to fast forward to 10 years, 1930. Rutherford's been in charge now for about, 14 years. We have 24,000 publishers. Again, this is a rounded figure. Oh, I also want to highlight the world's population, 1.8 billion at the time. Now we have, 2 billion people, 140 million people were born over deaths in that 10-year period. Again, these all numbers over here, I'm sorry, they're all estimates. We will never know exactly how many people are in the world because, like the country that I live in, the United States, we only do a census every 10 years, and it's never 100% accurate. Some countries never do censuses. Some do every 5 years, every 20 years. It's all different. So these are just estimates, and that's all we care about, how to see the growth compared to the world's population. But again, this is the great thing, 700% growth in 10 years. That's amazing. But it's really easy to grow religions when they're small. If you have a popular message, if you have a good rebranding, if you have a good leader, you can do that. Just like a business. A business is hard to start, but once you start a business, it's easy to grow it over the first couple of years if you have a successful product and good workers. What the hard part is to keep growing it decade after decade after decade. And that's what we're going to see right now. So now the ratio drops to 83,000, 1 to every 83,000. If you're a Cole Porter or a Pioneer, you had to talk to 83,000 people every year to witness about Jehovah God. That was your territory. Percent of the population, now we're getting into less decimals. It's not a rounding error. Now we're going to jump up to another 10 years to right during World War II. Again, this number is not accurate. Some say there was actually more Jehovah's Witnesses in 1940 because, some countries are under banned. But this is what I'm going by, what I have available. But it's like a 200% growth. It's a double growth. The number of witnesses dropped. There's 300 million more people in the world net bursts over deaths again in those 10 years. And you can see here's the world's population. You can see over here in this chart I made, it's a nice little steady decline, and that's the things about numbers. Now if I turn this off, I'm going to turn this off, and here is the publisher graph I made too. And we're going to go over that too. So you can't even see anything over here. There's just nothing here, and it goes up like this. Now some people might say, oh, look, Martin, excuse me, sorry about that. Look, Martin, that's steeper than the world's population. But what's this little bump right here? We're going to get into that later on. So we'll turn the world's population back on again. And we will go back to my numbers again. So now we're going to go to 1950. 1950, great growth. Again, this is almost 5 times, 230,000 people. There's a lot of factors why we had this big growth in those 10 years. A lot of people were fed up with secular world's worst war had just happened. 55 million people died. They were looking for hope and answers. People turned to religion during these horrible times, and these were horrible times. There was mass starvation. There was famine in Asia and Russia during this time period. Stalin killed probably almost as many people with famine that he did in the war. Pol Pot, I'm getting a little ahead of myself. You have Chairman Mao, what he did in China, just horrible things. Horrible things. People act like today's bad. These You don't know how bad the world was. 1930s, the 1960s. So many people died, so unnecessary suffering. Just read any literature or history, what really went on and during those times. Don't think of like Leave It to the Beaver or this idyllic, suburbans 1950s Americana. The vast world was a horrible place. Even though you had, again, you can see that only the world's population grew 300 million, but only 200 million over this 10-year period because the war death kept that from growing even faster. But again, at this point, Rutherford's died. Nora's in charge now. Nora was a great organizer, a great leader, and we're going to see what a great job he did in growing this number. So now let's jump to 1960. 1960, we have 700,000 witnesses. That's a triple growth almost in those 10 years. Still pretty impressive. We'll go back over here, and my laptop is not responding. Sorry about that. Never mind. It's not working. It's okay. So now the ratio to population is 1 to 4,000. That's not bad at all by 1960. But until I saw this chart, I never really noticed this. So something happened here. If you look here, 1960, 1970, it's only a 400,000 growth. That dropped to 40%. We're going to see bigger growth on the overall. But, again, people act like the 1960s, somebody came in. They did. But it wasn't as much. It was still, almost 500,000 came in this time period. Again, these are net numbers. These are baptisms, publisher accounts over deaths and disassociations and disfellowshipping and people becoming inactive. So again, that's a great growth, 400,000, but it's not as good as last previous years. But now we know 1975 is foremost and front and center, and we're going to see some crazy growth. So 1980, we went from 1 million, I shouldn't say we, Jehovah's Witnesses, sorry about that. They went from 1 million to 2 million. They doubled in 10 years, doubled. So if you look at the United States yearbook, again, I hate to make all my videos so United States centric. It's where I grew up. I'm really sorry about that. I apologize for my country. But it took till 1980-81 for United States branch to get back to the pre-75 levels. Go look at it. It dropped so much, and it was stagnant growth for 5 years. But the rest of the world, the 75 bubble didn't hit them. It wasn't foremost and center. The rest of the world kept on growing, kept on shrugging. And this is the numbers show that they almost doubled in just 10 years to 2 million. Now we're at 1 to 2,000. So now this 1990 is the first time that I'm recorded as a publisher. I became a publisher in 87. There was about 3 million witnesses when I became a publisher. By 3.5, 3.3, whatever it was. By 1990, they reached 4 million. Again, look at this. You could really say the heyday of witnesses was the 1980s. 2 million growth in just 10 years, net. By 1990, you couldn't fade now. You had to be disfellowshipped if you disassociated. You couldn't. They were cracking down. The more cult-like activities were happening by 81 to 1990. 1 to 1,300 publishers count. We're getting closer to a thousandth of a percent here. Okay, now let's go to 2000. Now, 2000, I'm already a ministerial servant. Again, another 2 million net growth in 10 years. But see, again, the drop-off is only 33% growth, because if they would maintain a 50% growth, that would have been, 8 million it would have been 4 million. It's really hard to maintain a 50% growth. For the first time in my life, I remember this, when the report came out 20 years ago, that there was one witness to 1,000 people, and that was just amazing. Wow. I remember this. United States was always around 300. The best I think I got to was like 273. One witnessed every 273 people. And here you get the thousands of a percent right here, 0.001. World's population's chugging along, 800 million here, 800 million here, 800 million here, and then, 900 million here. So we're going to get ahead here. So this is where you see the first problems. Even with 9/11, even with people coming back or inactive, this is the first problems in 2010. So 2010, in 10 years. Now, I didn't become an elder in 2011, so I was still a servant for 12 years. But here's we have 1.4 million growth, 25%. Great growth over 10 years. 25%, that's 2.5% a year on average. We dipped down to one witness every 932. But again, they should have maintained this 2 million, at least the 2 million. If they would have keep doubling 2 million, imagine if they would have kept the 2 million every 10 years, this would be, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. There should be about 12 million witnesses right now. They would have kept doing that. But we can see the work slowing down. Okay, and now let's go back to 10 years, 2020. This is remember, the report came out in 2020. This is the 2019 service year. This is pre-pandemic. You can't make anything, well, it's an aberration. But again, 1 million witnesses grew. Excuse me. I cannot talk. I don't even know how to use the English language. Sorry about that. Again, so remember, they had a million growth from 1970 to 1980. Only 1 million growth. At this point, it should be a much bigger growth because you have so many more pioneers. They have faster presses. They can print more magazines. They're using video. They're using all these things. Watchtower broadcasting, governing body updates, all these things. And only 1 million net witnesses came in. Now, this is also the 10 years. This is funny. So in these 10 years, my wife's pioneering. My daughter starts to pioneer. My son gets baptized. My daughter gets baptized. I become an elder. My wife and I started a poly group. I'm a group overseer. And then we all become an apostate in those 10 years, which is pretty funny. I never David. So this 8.4 million, my family, us four, our house are not recorded. My parents, my sister, all my cousins and aunts and uncles are. But yeah, that is what it is. Okay. So now let's go to the next 2 years. So, by the way, this only dropped from 932 to 928. Yeah. And then now the world's population in 2 years has grown about 100 million net. Witnesses have zero net growth. Remember, they lost a lot in 2021 service report. 2022, they got some back, but it wasn't enough to overcome the 840. So there is no growth in the last 2 years. Now, could they recover? Maybe. I don't know. But now we get to 940 because the world's population grew 100 million, but witnesses didn't grow at all. And you can see these numbers. It starts to go, 10 is better than 0.07. It's a little better, then it gets worse again. So the numbers are going back down again. So what does this video show? That I love numbers, and I probably half the people watching this are sleeping or muted me by now. But what I want to show you is that the growth has slowed down. And since I was an elder, I was a ministerial servant, I got to use an illustration. Imagine, friends, you see this massive tanker, thousands of pounds of oil, tons of oil, and it's going across the sea. Well, friends, the engines fail. Will that tanker immediately come to a complete stop? No. It has so much mass and so much inertia that it will drift. It'll keep on forward because it has so much weight behind it. So likewise, we see this massive organization of 8.4 million witnesses, even though it hasn't come to a complete stop, the engines have been cut and it has some momentum and it will keep on going forward slightly, but all the power has gone out. Okay, sorry about that. Hopefully I didn't trigger any of you. That's my holy voice. That was pretty scary. I might delete that when I edit this video out. So again, that's what I really think, that the growth is not there anymore. They're fudging the numbers. I already made a video about that, how as a service overseer, I manipulated the numbers, make the circuit overseer happy. And the August service report is the last month of the service year. They wanted everybody to be active. So you would go to old people, shut-ins, nursing home people, and in August you would say, did you have any time at all? Well, I did place a tract, this month. Okay, you have time. Well, I did that in July and August. So, every congregation I was in, the August service report would always have 20 to 30 publishers higher than our actual cards, because if you didn't put any time in for May, June, and July, and then you could put in time in August, so that publisher can get counted 4 or 5 times or 2 times. This would happen throughout the month. If you were in regular, if you missed December, and the service overseer or the coordinator would stop with a witness and say, hey, you haven't out in service. Well, I did go out in service. I just forgot to put my time in. Well, the March report would have, February, January, December, and it didn't have to be August. But these numbers are doctored anyway. But this shows you that their growth has come to a complete stop. If they would have kept this 50% growth up. Again, they could be 16 million people if they were doubling every 10 years, witnesses. But look at the world's population. I'll close this video now. So in 1975, when I was born, it was around 4 million people. Right now, next year, this year to next year should hit 8 billion. So it has doubled in my 45 years. Watchtower has more than doubled in those, 45 years. But people don't realize this 8 billion people, that means God, Jehovah, if Armageddon came, Jehovah would kill 4 billion people in 1975. Now he has to kill 8 billion people. How is that loving? How is that special? Now, witnesses would apologize and say, well, these are the only ones righteously disposed, the only ones with a good heart, blah, blah, blah. I call bull crap on that. I am sorry. That's disgusting. This cult is disgusting. So, again, if you have any other questions about numbers, Jehovah's Witnesses and growth, feel free to ask a question, a comment. Follow me on Twitter. I'm pretty active there, maybe too active on Twitter. I think I'll leave my link in the description. Maybe I should do that for sometimes. Yeah, so this is just a little fun I had with numbers and graphs. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. If not, let me know. I'd like to do a couple more videos. I want to have my brother come on and have an interview with my brother about being the black sheep as a family. Imagine me being an elder and my sister being, Bethelite, and then him getting in trouble constantly. The emotional toll that black sheep Jehovah's Witnesses go through compared to what I went through is pretty bad. So I want to interview him. I want to do rebuttal on my, first outline public talk I gave 20 years ago, and my special talk too. So stay tuned for more videos on the John Martin channel. And thank you for watching. Have a great day, and I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.